Hey, Clemson family. Now that is more like it. Clemson easily dispenses with NC State thanks to some quote unquote juice from Coach Dabo Swinney. And more importantly, the Tigers showed the in season growth that's been so typical of the program during the playoff era.
I'm Daniel Shirley. I want to talk about that two-headed monster at tight end.
I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to episode 29 of the Reign Supreme Alway podcast. You can find all our episodes at our homepage, www.clemsonkickoff.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Both of those handles are at Clemson Kickoff. Well, I guess maybe the Tigers got a sugar boost out of those Krispy Kremes last week because both sides of the ball played their most thoroughly effective football of the year. Maybe the best performance we've seen against quality competition all the way back to that 2020 ACC championship game win over Notre Dame. Now, Daniel, you were there, so you'd have a closer perspective than I did, but I will say this, even though that first half definitely had my cardio rate up, I don't think the score really reflected just how far apart these two teams were, particularly in the second half.
It felt like Clemson was in control of this game, even though it was a close game, and the score was closer than maybe it looked like on the field. I was talking to Grace Rayner, who works with me at The Athletic, and we were in the press box, and I said, when's the last time Clemson won one of these kinds of games? It feels like it's been 3 years. We both quickly remembered the 2020 ACC championship game against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame was a top 10 team, and Clemson was a top 10 team. And they both went to the playoff when Clemson won that game. But this felt like kind of old school Clemson football. And I mean, 2016, 2017, 2018, as opposed to what we saw last year. The offense was effective and efficient. The defense was aggressive, but not reckless. Bill, I thought the defense was reckless a lot against Wake Forest. Now, I also think Wake Forest's offense is a lot more dynamic, has a lot more weapons than NC State. And, we saw that yesterday with Wake Forest's win over Florida State. Those wide receivers are really, really talented. I don't think that NC State has that kind of weaponry on the outside that scares you to death like Wake Forest does. So even though both teams have really good quarterbacks, and I thought we saw that play out last night. Clemson's secondary looked like it was a lot more confident going up against this group than it did against Wake Forest.
I felt it was Clemson's most complete game defensively of the year. It was a little bit shaky in that first drive, and then Coach Dabo Swinney, I talked about the juice. Well, that wasn't really the reference of the quote, but he kind of brought the juice, got into the defensive huddle, really kind of lit into them apparently, and as he put it, he got the initials a little wrong, but some, quote, NSWF assertions that would not be suitable for most workplaces, and of course, he left it at that. What happens on the sideline stays on the sideline as often as it can. There was one play in particular where there was a screen play about third quarter, I think it was, into the middle of the line. They handled that very effectively. I think it went maybe for a yard or two. It certainly didn't end up being one of those things that exposed the Clemson defense like the screen game would have early in the year. The corners settled in. Wiggins with much better performance out there. Makuba looked better before he had the targeting ejection from the game. Fortunately, that was the first half. He'll be back next week. A lot of growth out of Toriano Pride out there on the corner as well. And Dabo Swinney said the game really tended to slow down for him. Maybe not just him, maybe a lot of guys. Things are finally happening much more naturally.
They are. And it felt like for the first time last night that Clemson played, and we hear coaches use this phrase all the time, and complementary football. Last year when Clemson won, it was all about the defense. How many games did Clemson win because of its offense? I don't really, maybe the Wake Forest game of last year, but other than that, it was all about the Clemson defense. In the first couple of games this year, the Tech game felt like it was about the defense. The Furman felt like it was about the offense. Louisiana Tech offense. And then last week, it was about the offense. But then Saturday night, this was complete football. And it felt like a complete team victory for the Tigers on Saturday night.
Here's a quick quote from Wes Goodwin after the game. Hopefully the audio will be decent on this. It was kind of a weird place where they were having this interview, but he talked about being more comfortable making calls for the secondary this week than he was last week. Here's what he had to say about that, and I really think it applies overall to his play calling defensively last night. This is courtesy of TigerNet.com.
Yeah, I feel like I did. I mean, kind of in the third quarter, I feel like we kind of got into a rhythm and just we're mixing, 3D, 2D, whatever coverage to the situation. Our guys had a lot of confidence in what we were doing.
And to hear that entire interview, go ahead and go over to tigernet.com or find them on YouTube. I think overall it was a very balanced defensive effort. I looked at the stats later on. There were 7 players with at least 4 tackles. I think it was like 17 players who made tackles overall. That speaks to team effort defensively. And I know complementary football is more about offense and defense, but these guys really had that teamwork thing going. They were containing the NC State offensive attack very well, all stayed on their assignments, let the plays come to them, didn't get overly aggressive like you talked about.
Right. And it felt like they dominated up front, right? NC State couldn't run the ball with any success. The Wolfpack only had 34 yards rushing, and I know that includes sack yardage, but even without the sack yardage, they were only in the 50s in rushing yards. So this was about this defensive front getting after NC State, and then the back 7 or back 8, depending on what kind of formation Clemson was in, really doing a terrific job covering these receivers and making life hard for Devin Leary. Look, I know NC State threw for 245 yards. They had to throw the ball 47 times, but a lot of those yards came on that last drive. It felt up until that point that Clemson really controlled this offensive attack after the first drive of the game.
Absolutely. And, those points did come after a very questionable roughing the passer call that took away an interception. But up front, I was just so impressed. Tyler Davis was a fully operational Death Star, so to speak, and really, I think, was the core of that front 7 having a really good game. KJ Henry was nearly that good as well. Barrett Carter with a key sack to start the second half. Only 3 sacks overall for this team, 5 tackles for loss, but they were disruptive. And more importantly, that disruption did not come at the expense of leaving holes that could be exploited. They stayed in their assignments. They stayed in their areas. When the ball came their way, there was somebody there to make a play far more often than not, unlike those first 4 games.
Didn't it feel like they had more than 3 sacks? When
Yes.
I saw that at the end of the game, I was like, that can't be right. There was pressure on Devin Leary the whole game. I don't know how he held on to that ball when Carter hit him on that play to open the second half. I thought for sure that was going to be a fumble. There was just so much pressure on Devin Leary and so much pressure in that NC State backfield the entire game. And I thought that was impressive after the way Clemson played defensively against Wake Forest. I know a lot of people are going to look at the secondary, but the defensive line didn't play great in that game either. And that group really, really stepped up on Saturday night.
I think the defense also got a boost from the offense and the ability to move the chains. They held the ball 14 of the first 24 minutes of the game. They had several long drives, twice after big takeaways from the defense, a 7-play scoring drive following an interception, a 9-play scoring drive after a fumble recovery. And those can just be daggers to an opponent. They can absolutely take over a game. The offense, though, in general, it wasn't that thing we've seen with just a few runs and then a couple of screens and then all of a sudden a home run ball out of nowhere. It was more steady. It was moving the ball all over the field, using different people to gain yardage. And I think that's why during this game, my inner voice, even when the pulse rate was up and the first half score was close, I was kind of feeling more like we're kind of letting them hang around, which of course means there's confidence that Clemson was distinguishing itself as the better team.
And Bill, I thought that drive at the end of the first half when NC State had scored a touchdown to take the lead, and then Clemson goes right down the field and scores late on the DJ Uyunglele 1-yard run, and that came after the swing pass to Will Shipley. I thought that was the best drive Clemson's had all year. I did. And it wasn't big play after big play, but it's like you said, it was just kind of a steady, okay, hey, we're, second down, we're going to get it here. And then, third and short, we get it. And then that play to Shipley was really kind of, quote, the big play. But that was a really impressive drive, a terrific answer. And then they go out and start this third quarter with another drive a lot like that. And DJ hits Jake Brenningstool with the 7-yard score to make it a 10-point game. And it felt like that gave the team a little bit of chance to breathe and really kind of be in control of this game.
Head coach Dabo Swinney talked about the efficiency of the offense and how that was reflected by so few possessions taking place in the first half. Here's that quote, courtesy of TigerNet.
And then being efficient. I mean, the first half, we had the ball 4 possessions.
That was like the fastest half of football in the first quarter. It was crazy. I don't know what the time of possession was in that first quarter. It was crazy. But we had 4 possessions and scored 3 times. But you kind of went into halftime a little frustrated. So just not a ton of possessions. I don't know what we end up play-wise. I mean, we only had, what do we have? How many plays do we have? 60-something, 68 plays. But, we took advantage of our opportunities and were efficient and glad we were able to punch that last one in.
And again, you can catch the entire interview. Dabo Swinney's interview is a 2-parter. That's at tigernet.com and on their YouTube channel. I think you're right. The key was to carry that over into the second half, to not allow any halftime adjustments from NC State to take the Tigers off the track. They absolutely did that very well. And even into late in the game, when that defense really had NC State's offense just gasping for air, Clemson's offense kept putting points on the board.
And again, answering when it needed to answer. And it was just a steady game. Like last week was all about the big plays. And we saw how many big plays did Clemson have in that game. But this one was just steady. It wasn't spectacular offensively. There weren't 600 yards of offense, but it was just guys doing their job. You look at Will Shipley. I mean, he didn't have a ton of yards in the game, but he averaged 4.2 yards per carry and did his job when he was called upon. Brenningstool, Davis Allen, Ngata. I mean, all these guys are just doing their job. And that's kind of what we've talked about with these offensive guys, is just do the job in front of you and don't try to do more than that. But you look at, how many guys caught balls? 8 players caught passes in this game. I know Antonio Williams had another really solid game, but you just like what you've seen from this team and how it got the job done on Saturday night. Gives you a lot of confidence moving forward. There wasn't anything fluky about it. There wasn't anything where you felt like you weren't in control of the game like last week, where it felt like you were out of control the entire game. That was such a wild game, and you hate those kinds of games. But everything felt like it was in Clemson's control last night, and that was good to see.
They did a nice job of not allowing NC State's aggressiveness to take over the pace of the game, and even took advantage of it for that super cool touchdown at the end there by DJ Uyunglele. Nice little description from tight end Jake Brenningstool about that. Here's how he came up with the Dabos juice quote. This is courtesy of TigerNet.
No, yeah, we've never practiced that play before, so we just pulled it out and scored on it. So, that's Coach Swinney's juice, I guess. And then it was just, we were all fired up, That kind of put the dagger in them and put the game away, so it had us all fired up. So Swinney drew it up in the huddle, and then we just executed it and scored. So it's a play we have, and then he just kind of made a tweak to it, and it happened to be a touchdown. So I knew how the defense had been playing. They played pretty aggressive the whole night, and on film you can see how fast they triggered, and then everybody just kind of bit on the fake, and then he walked into the end zone. So it was awesome.
And again, you can hear that entire interview. That's a quick one at TigerNet or on their YouTube channel. Lots of different targets, lots of creativity. Antonio Williams led them with 7 targets, led them with 5 receptions. Freshman really starting to come into his own. And they even trusted Adam Randall, even though he only got 1 target in the game. It was on a 3rd and long. It was a nice little seam route. Very well thrown ball by Uyunglele. Good to see him find that guy in traffic, and it just was very well defended by NC State. Pretty much the only reason that it didn't move the chains on that play. I know you want to get into that 2-headed monster at tight end, though, between Brenningstool and Davis Allen.
Yeah, I love what I'm seeing from those 2 guys. I am really impressed by both of them. And you see last night, they combined for 8 catches for 75 yards and the touchdown. I think Jake Brenningstool has improved as much as anybody on this team. Where last year you thought you could see the talent. Yeah, he's a young guy. He's talented, but when are we going to start to see it? Well, we started to see it the last couple of weeks, and he has really stepped up. And I like him and Davis Allen out on the field together. I do. I think it is a terrific combination. It gives you 2 big guys, athletic guys, that maybe the other team's safety and cornerbacks can't deal with. I'm thinking you're going to see a lot more from that from the Tigers going forward.
I do think we'll see more of that two tight end setup. I think it was TigerIllustrated.com, the Rivals Network site for Clemson sports, where they predicted late in the offseason during a reader mailbag that there probably would be more 21 personnel, meaning two tight ends, one running back, as opposed to a 12, which would be that two running back set that we saw late last season. Allen and Brenningstool really doing well. And Brenningstool may not have the bulk that Allen has as far as being a part of the blocking game as effectively, but he sure has that Jordan Leggett type athleticism to him, doesn't he? And it's almost like having a sort of Dwayne Allen and Jordan Leggett combo out there at tight end, probably the previous two best tight ends that Clemson has seen, each very distinct. And I know we hate player comps, but it is eerily reminiscent of those two guys suddenly being on the same team, isn't it?
It is. And Brendan Stool, the thing about him is, you're right, he's not bulky, but he is athletic. And you saw that again last night on the touchdown. DJ throws it up. And I mean, what a great throw by DJ to put the ball in the right spot where it needs to go. And Jake goes and gets it. And just love it. Love everything about it. And I'm telling you, Jake Brenningstool is a confident young man, and he's electric. And I'm wanting to see a lot more of him moving forward. But I love Davis Allen as well. You know, the receivers have really stepped up the last couple of weeks. We've seen that in all these guys. I know there were a couple of spots last night. I know Bo Collins had kind of a semi-drop where the ball was a little bit out of his reach, but it's a play you've got to make. And DJ had a couple of where he overthrew just a little bit. There was a big play to Bo earlier that DJ missed. But this passing game feels like it's coming together pretty nicely. And Bill, I'll tell you what, where that starts is up front. We talk about that all the time. DJ had all the time in the world to throw the ball. When he has that much time and these guys are getting open, this offense can be really, really dynamic.
Just amazing to see. And I'll go ahead and further dislocate my shoulder, patting myself on the back a little bit. But when all the Cade Klubnik talk was kind of reaching a fever pitch during the late off season, even into the early season after that single drive that Klubnik had, by the way, Uiagalelei all along was the best, most likely path to improved passing performance out of this offense, as well as an improved offensive line. And we've seen both. We've seen that go hand in hand. They are feeding off each other. There's plenty of time for Uiagalelei to operate, to see the field. We know he's got the knowledge in his head. He can absolutely just run right down everything a defense throws at him. When he discusses it after the game, it's like burned in his brain. He knows exactly what's going on. His anticipatory skills have gotten better. It's not about perfection is the standard. That's not what's hanging on the wall. Best is the standard. And maybe Clemson doesn't have the best offense. You can look around and find higher point totals. But I suspect the key in this season is something that I've always kind of figured about Coach Dabo Swinney's approach in this program, and it's to use certain games to work on certain things to show these guys they've got to be able to execute any part of the playbook. He never settles for, hey, Wayne Gallman was running for 7 yards a clip at Louisville a bunch of years ago. I've talked about this in previous episodes, but he didn't just make him the bell cow. He made the offense continue to do every single thing. And it's weeks like this that shows up, that he didn't just settle for Georgia Tech's biggest weakness and exploit it. He didn't just settle for Louisiana Tech's or Wake Forest's biggest weakness and exploit that as well. He made the offense do every single thing. He made the defense do every single thing. And that came together in a very complete ball game against an NC State team that, I'm not convinced they were as good as I thought they were coming into that game. But both things can be true, that Clemson played a really, really great game that could have handled just about any team in the country last night. And NC State has a lot more work to do than we thought.
I think NC State's defense is really good. I do. And I think their quarterback is really good. Their running backs are really good. They've got some deficiency at wide receiver. They don't make the plays that a Wake Forest makes or that some of these other top teams make. I really believe NC State's still a top 15 team. I don't think in my mind there's any doubt that that's true. Did they put so much into this game that they lose the game and they just kind of let their season fall apart? I mean, we've seen that from teams in the past. I'm really interested to see how this team bounces back. We saw the guts and fortitude that Wake Forest had after losing a gut-wrenching game to Clemson to come back and go on the road and beat Florida State. I don't think Wake Forest is going anywhere. That's a gutsy team. And I think you're going to see that from NC State as well. I don't believe this team's going to fall apart after losing that game on Saturday. I just think Clemson was the better team and showed it in pretty much every aspect of the game.
Yeah, I'm pretty surprised to see NC State still ranked 14th, quite frankly. I'm surprised to see them ahead of Wake Forest in particular. I know transitive isn't always a perfect measure of things, but boy, the eyeball test and just looking at the numbers, Wake Forest clearly a better team than NC State. All I can surmise is that voters in other parts of the country didn't watch the game, only saw the halftime score close, only saw the final score within 10 points, didn't realize that Clemson was fully in control at 30-13, and the garbage time touchdown kind of narrowed the margin at the end there. Clemson still 5th. Okay, I'll just remind myself that midseason polls don't matter any more than a halftime score really matters, right? I don't know enough about Michigan to say, yeah, Clemson's better. I don't think I would vault Clemson ahead of Alabama, Georgia, or Ohio State. But boy, Alabama and Georgia have shown some flaws. Ohio State, a little bit here and there as well. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens moving forward. And of course, Clemson has a lot of business to take care of, including Florida State in 2 weeks, Syracuse in 3 weeks. And by the way, a little more perspective, we did find out Saturday that Wake Forest is quite legitimate. They knocked off FSU. It was a convincing win that they came up with despite yielding a Seminoles touchdown march right down the field to open the game. They took control of that football game, won by, a comfortable margin, we'll say. It wasn't a blowout, but the coming weeks are going to tell us more about Florida State. The coming weeks are going to tell us more about Syracuse. Also going to tell us a little more about NC State, I think.
We've got to see how the season plays out, but man, it's so much fun. I'm telling you, Bill, Saturday night was just electric at Death Valley. I mean, it was, and I know they've added all the sound systems and the music and all that, and it's great, but the crowd was just tremendous. The student section was on fire. So it was a lot of fun to see that, and that's what we love about college football. You hear Chris Fowler talking about the Tigers getting off the bus, and he says only in college football, right? I mean, that's what this is, and that's why we love the sport so much. And Clemson's right back in the mix. Max Olson for us at The Athletic had a piece this morning on our website Sunday morning about takeaways from Saturday, and he said, I owe DJ an apology. He said he didn't think that DJ would bounce back like this. And, you're starting to see Clemson be mentioned again in that playoff contenders race. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. This team feels like it's back, feels like it's got its mojo back, its confidence, swagger, whatever word you want to use. But it also feels like it's focused. You saw a focused group Saturday night. And if they keep that focus and, don't lose it against Boston College, don't lose it in these other games, I think you're going to see Clemson right back in the hunt.
I want to drop in one more quote. I'm glad you brought it back to focus. This is from KJ Henry. He and others talked about how great the atmosphere was and how much it helped. Jordan McFadden was another guy who tweeted about that. But I think the most important thing KJ Henry said after the game was talking about that focus, wrapping their heads around what needed to happen and how they could perform better. Here's that quote, one last one from TigerNet.
We knew we could play better. We know we haven't necessarily played up to our standard. Really, as a collective, all 4 quarters, all season, we knew that we could play better tonight. And, we feel that, when we play to our best, it really doesn't matter who we're playing. We're going to be a problem. And so we were a little bit of a problem tonight.
And again, that is courtesy of TigerNet.com, and you can find it on their YouTube channel as well. I think that's got to continue to be the key thought in this locker room. They can't allow themselves to fall into the trap that so many college teams fall into and say, all right, now we've got it going. Now we've got it figured out. Now we can do this. Now our talent takes over. You've got to bring that approach every time, especially against Florida State. I'm not convinced that that won't be a coin flip game like it used to be years ago, especially going down there to Tallahassee with a fan base that is really energized. It probably will be a hostile environment again. There's a lot of football left to be played. It's 60 minutes per game and it's 12 games per season, isn't it?
Dabo talked about it after the Wake Forest game. Each game is a season unto itself. You don't get to carry over anything from the NC State game when you go to Boston. And that really has to be the focus of this team. KJ Henry has become a clear leader on this team. I don't think you can deny that, and you're seeing that each week. When somebody makes a mistake on the defense on the sideline, he's over there talking to them and working with them. It's really fun to see the player and leader he has become. So just keep that same focus, keep that same mentality, and the talent, the schemes, all that stuff is there, this team's going to be just fine.
Definitely a better vibe as we record this today compared to last week after that Wake Forest game being disappointing on several fronts despite pulling out a win against a team that, again, starting to look really, really good. Thank goodness to that Florida State win. The energy in Death Valley, you could see it come through the television. I know you're saying it was just like that while you were there. What was the vibe for you? I've talked about how I just felt like they're letting them hang around, but they're the better team. What was your impression as the game went on, and what did you think the emotions were like in the building?
It was tremendous, and there were no crazy texts from Daniel this time for you. But I felt like that score at the end of the first half really settled the team down and settled it into, okay, we're the better team. We're going to win this game. That was an important drive, Bill. I mean, because NC State had gone down the field and scored, and there were a couple of questionable calls on that drive. You can look at the targeting foul on Makuba. It looked like targeting to me, but it was gray area. The pass interference call on Mickens was terrible. I mean, it's just a terrible call right there at the end zone, and NC State scores and takes advantage, and you go, okay, well, we're in a dogfight. And then Clemson goes right down the field and scores and retakes the lead. And it just felt from there that they said, okay, we're the better team. We're going to impose our will on you, and you can't really do anything about it. And they really dominated both lines of scrimmage. I think we saw that play out in the sacks, and Clemson's running game was effective. NC State's was not. NC State didn't get much pressure at all on DJ. So Clemson's lines of scrimmage really dominated this game. And then I think the Ben Boulware quote, it's our 82,000 against their 11, right? That's what it was Saturday night. The stadium was electric. It was on fire. The crowd was terrific, as good as I've heard the crowd in the last 3 or 4 years in the games that I've been to. So it was a lot of fun, and it was good to see this team step up and play well in that atmosphere and not get too hyped up by everything that went on in the pregame.
Killing me that I can't get up there this year. I got a different obligation, another gig that I have Saturday nights, kind of keeping me out of Death Valley. Of course, very few of us will be going to Boston College the next week. There's not a lot of places to sit. They don't have tailgating. It's a very weird atmosphere up there. Team just has to be careful not to stub its toe. Sometimes that happens with a lesser opponent on the road. And then the Florida State game, I think they'll be totally up for that. We're going to try to look at more about those upcoming games in our next episode, dig a little bit into FSU and Syracuse as well as Boston College, and kind of reset now where the division stands. And we'll definitely take a look at Boston College, who had that surprising win over Louisville. Anything else you're going to be looking for in the coming days?
I'm really interested to hear about the injury situation. What do we hear about Brian Brzee and his medical situation? When will he be back? Everything that he's been through and his family's been through. They need some good news. And then how is Clemson going to be in the secondary? When are Sheridan Jones and Malcolm Green going to be back? How's Makuba doing with that arm injury? And he played through it on Saturday night. When is Mickens going to be back, or will he be back this weekend? So all of those things are going to be key to how this team continues to play well and what kind of success they have in the second half of the season. And we're almost to the second half of the season, even though that's a little bit hard to believe.
Question marks always persist, every team, every season, but after that win over NC State, the ones that looked like they were in bold red type certainly look a lot more manageable now, and it certainly feels pretty good to see where this team is capable of going. Well, Clemson family, we are glad you found us. Thanks for being with us on this episode. You can hear our past episodes. You can keep up with kickoff times at clemsonkickoff.com. That's our homepage. We've got some other resources there as well. You can also find us on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff, sharing our thoughts there, reacting to news as it happens in between episodes. We are also on Instagram, trying to have some fun with that, at Clemson Kickoff there as well. Until the next episode, previewing Boston College and taking stock of the Atlantic, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.
Clemson ran late last season. Bless you. I'm sure that was audible.